It's Super Mikey. Today we're talking about the conspiracy of the orphan trains itself. And this is about to get wild.
Insane asylums are not what you've been told. Between 1800 and 1930, the parents were being removed from this timeline. Adults that knew the truth about this world. The truth that the palaces from the old world were already here, and they were not being constructed in a single year. The parents of the orphans. These adults were taken into massive buildings against their will, where we read that they were committed into the asylums with very little power to resist. And once they got there, they were not coming out. We've shown the reasons that they would just make up to take these parents. A reason being that they were embarrassing the family. If they were embarrassing the family, this would get you removed from the timeline. So I'm gonna ask you all, how many of you out there that have had family members over the past 10 years that didn't like the way that you thought? Remember, not going along with the mainstream, as we've seen. People were all looked at as crazy, unstable, and the rest. This was taking place only 100 to 200 years ago. We are not far removed from what just happened. So it's no wonder the people born in the 1930s didn't really want to question these buildings that we see all over the world. A lot of these people watched their parents get taken and put into the
Yeah, the whole history is actually written by the winners, and the narrative has been changed like countless of times itself, At this point, like, you can never trust any historical piece of evidence. Like, it's at that point in time, like, our own historical evidence does not even seem like viable anymore.
these asylums for critically thinking and not going along with the made-up story of massive buildings being constructed in a year and then knocked down because they were just temporary. The US government, we are told, did not keep records on how many patients being taken into the insane asylums were parents. 100 years ago, they don't have any records, meaning that the numbers that they give us about these insane asylums, they are no longer trusted. Especially when we see that they were misdiagnosing people, saying that people with postpartum depression, these people were insane. There is no reliable count as to how many people were wrongly committed. And we all know that there were no rules once these parents got in there. How many of these people do you think experienced abuse behind closed doors? Almost certainly that is underreported. Another shocking line. How many of these parents supposedly recovered but were never let out of the insane asylum? We're told that no national data exists. This whole thing was a free-for-all, a controlled operation that all just happened. An operation to remove the adults. These adults that knew too much. They were all taken and kept in these buildings. It makes zero sense if you're following the mainstream history. And then these parents' kids, they were taken and placed into the orphan asylums, teaching these kids a brand new mainstream lie, completely destroying all of their families and completing the reset. This is all the exact same time period that we've been talking about for years, the 18 and 1900s.
Follow My Lunch Break's a pretty good channel.
The beginning of this new timeline that we're currently living in. We saw all of the data in episode 186, seeing that nobody was going to insane asylums in the 1700s. In 1800, nobody was being put into these buildings, with it just totally taken off in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. But between 1800 and 1930, they were setting the stage for the entire world that we live in right now. A complete attack on what the people knew, how people thought, and where they would go if they didn't accept it. I also believe that they wanted their kids, because we see that childbirth was the biggest reason for taking somebody into the insane asylum, where we all read that doctors believed that childbirth itself could trigger insanity.
What? What the fuck?
And women were taken from their kids, taken from their family only 100 years ago for giving birth, not sleeping for days because the baby was crying. And these people were living in a shed, suffering. They were just making up any reason at all to take the parents away from these kids. saying you're going to the insane asylum for life because you're breastfeeding, where doctors of course believed that prolonged breastfeeding could exhaust a woman and contribute to mental breakdown. They were stealing these kids. Now remember, all of this is in my opinion, and you're always free to think whatever you'd like. And this goes for all of my episodes. Now that being said, they were also taking adults for being stressed out from raising children, being in poverty, having too many young children, anxiety about feeding the family. Now, at this exact same time that they're all worried about feeding the family, we've been told for years that this was the booming 18 and 1900s, where everybody was just building palace churches, palaces everywhere in a year or less, shipping materials like 50 miles on a horse in the rain and in the winters. No power tools, no training, again, no shipping companies and the rest. Yet all of these adults are stressed out, having anxiety about just feeding their family, suffering, and being taken into these insane asylums. This is the same exact time period that we've all been covering. And I'm just letting you know that we are just getting started today. Because if a mother was committed, taken, and put into the insane asylum forever, the children would be sent to relatives or an orphanage. A topic that is very dark, it's shocking, and it's something that's a part of our true history. And it's something that we're going to expose right now. Welcome to episode 187 of My Lunch Break. I hope you're all having a great day.
Bro, what the fuck is this?
And if you're new, welcome. All of our sponsors over on Patreon. Thank you to FlatEarthDave.com. You can check out his app, the Flat Earth, Sun, Moon, and Zodiac app. Wasn't I told that the people that were suffering in constructing World's Fair palaces in 12 months or less for fun, just to knock them all down a year later? Why wasn't I told that they were also being taken into the insane asylums? Why wasn't I told that data was never properly documented as to how many adults were actually taken? And if the count on the adults is not accurate, why in the world would I ever trust the count on how many children were taken into the orphan asylums? So going back to the World's Fairs, or honestly any picture from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, it's like everybody was just on their best behavior. They were all dressed up in suits all the time, walking around on dirt roads with their horses and wagons. And I believe they were just trying to fit in with the crowd, not wanting to stand out and be seen as different. I think we know exactly why these people were all dressed up and looking so robotic. They all accepted the lie, and they did not want to be removed from their family and from the picture. They did what they were told, and they accepted that they would lead the reset, and they would be quiet. A civilization that was struggling to get by, riding around on horses, and struggling to find food. They all had the night.
By the way, people who don't know what actually is the orphan trains are, like, people used to say that there used to be like a severe population crisis, and they're like fill up the population by bringing orphans in trains and shit. Like, that's much more conspiracy and deep, like where these orphans actually came from, like conspiracy regarding that.
Nicest suits in the world. I'm gonna ask you all a question. Do you think that these people were all given these outfits, handing out these costumes for the pictures, and then going home and sleeping in this? And I'm gonna be honest with you, I would not want to be in school right now, studying this lie, paying to memorize this nonsense. The parents were all taken away from their kids for basically any made-up reason at all. They did not need to ask anyone. They could just go into their house and take them and say that they're insane. Not only is this all happening, but at the exact same time, we have World War I taking place. 1914 to 1918, 4.8 million men were sent away from their kids, meaning that 1 out of every 5 adult males were taken and sent to World War I for the United States. These kids would be left alone with their mom, who then had these random people coming to their door and telling them that they're insane. And the kids would just be taken away. The dad would then return home from being in World War I, and the wife would be in the insane asylum, and the kids would all be gone. They would be in the orphanage. This absolutely 100% just took place around 100 years ago. And this should make you question everything. In 1918, at the exact same time as the war and the asylums, we are told that there was an influenza pandemic, and 675,000 Americans died, with many children losing a parent. This explains so much about the confusion that we see today. It explains how they were able to reset the whole story, how they were able to explain away all of these buildings, and get the entire population to just accept what they're saying, to just accept these fake stories. They trained them as kids, and they did it through the orphan asylums. I also want you to remember that this is not just in the USA. This is happening all over the world at the exact same time. But we see in the USA one of the weirdest things. Between 1854 and 1929, there was something called orphan trains. Trains filled with thousands of children. These are the kids, in my opinion, of the adults that we've been talking about, These kids were all taken and put on a train to get as far away from their parents as possible, to get away from any extended family. And we are told that they were sent to populate the west side of the United States. We already know that the pioneers traveled the Oregon Trail in the mid-1800s, setting it all up and getting it ready for all the orphans to come and repopulate those states. Now, I'm about to expose something horrible. I'm going to show you just how dark this is, how disgusting these individuals were that created this entire operation. Exposing why I believe that we are in a little season. They did not care about these kids one bit. Creating the war to take the parents away, and then taking the kids, ramping up the insane asylum, and taking their parents away for the stupidest reasons, and allowing it to happen. And this is what is documented about what happened to these people's children. We are told that the child was then taken to the orphanage. They would then have these children getting on a train, boarding a train that headed west. Kids were the majority of them.
Bro, imagine being a kid at that time. It would have been horrible, and like it would have been like you have every reason to be hate the fucking entire world itself, dude.
Between 6 and 14 years old. The towns were all notified through newspapers that these kids were coming. Trains full of kids. Where this goes further, adults. Let's all be honest, it was not families. We all know that this was not a bunch of families gathering around the train to help a kid. We all know that. Where we read that these adults would talk to these kids, and they would decide whether they wanted to take one into their home. This just happened.
Oh, hell no. This is some human trafficking fucking shit.
This just happened to a lot of our family members. Deciding which kid they wanted to take into their home is exactly what we're reading. And the child was then...
That's not adoption. That's actually human trafficking. Like guys under the name of adoption.
Left with their new family. This is horrific. Who knows who picked these kids off the train? Now, the majority of the kids were 6 to 14 years old. But there were also infants and toddlers. Adults, not families. These were random adults. And we all know this. It's not families taking these kids off the train. Adults could, and did, take more than one child off the orphan train, where farmers were getting workers, basically. We all know. A lot of these kids were not treated great. They were taken on a train, away from their parents, and dumped off at a random stop, thousands of miles away from their parents. A parent that was at war, or in the insane asylum, where a lot of these kids were taken into homes that were this word. There are documented cases of children being this word. Overworked, treated as servants, and I'm sure other things that I'm definitely not going to say right now. And the worst part about it is that they never went back and checked on these kids after they were picked up at the train station. And we had to cover this today, because this is exactly how you reset the way people think. You take the parents that remembered too much, or wouldn't keep their mouth shut, and you take their kids. And then you send these kids on a train to some random guy's house on the West Coast, thousands of miles away, and you never check on them again. And this is the real history of the USA. This is what just happened. This is not thousands of years ago. This is not
Bro, this is crazy.
a myth. This happened, and it happened to a lot of our family members. Normally we talk about the buildings, but the insane asylums and the orphans are such a huge part of this topic and needed to be covered today. The way that people thought in the 18 and 1900s, it had to be changed. And something massive like this had to happen to reset what people knew about the world. Normally I make jokes about Donkeys Incorporated right now, but today I'm just going to thank you all for supporting the channel. You're all awesome. We'll get back to all the jokes next week, as well as a faulty wiring department. Real. And those kids, they really were taken on those trains. The question that needs to be asked is, what do you think all of this does to an entire generation of people? An entire generation of children that don't...
It's just that, like, they brought an entire generation new people and they have no history of their past or anything like that. That's crazy. And they're trying to repopulate the whole entire, you know, civilizations and shit.
don't have their parents anymore, and were dropped off in a random town, thousands of miles away, where a random stranger's looking at them, deciding whether they want to take them home or not.
And they have no memory of who their parents actually also are. Like some, I can only guess, like infants don't have memory, like what the fuck actually happened, right? One day they're boarded on a fucking train.
This is what happened. This is the true story about what happened here. It's a story that I believe they want forgotten. It explains why a lot of our relatives didn't question things the way that we are today, and had no idea what really happened here, and why everyone just had no choice but to believe what they've been told and trust the shows that were put on their TVs. If nothing else, those kids that were on those trains, those kids in the orphan programs, they deserve 100% to be remembered.
This week's episode of Hidden History, I will be discussing the orphan trains and its connection to the Tartarian civilizations. When you look at history, you will discover that there are some huge events that have happened that don't seem to be mentioned. One such event is called the Orphan Train Movement, which was a welfare program that transported over 250,000 children, with claims the number was actually over 540,000 on locomotive carriages from crowded urban areas in the eastern United States to foster homes in the Midwest United States. It was claimed that these infants had been orphaned, abandoned, abused, or homeless, when actually these were new immigrants. So where did all these infants come from? Before the orphan train movement occurred between 1864 to 1889 and became so prevalent in the United States, there were many stories at this time from the American Indian tribes who had fought against the white giants. It would suggest from the historical information that the red-haired Tartarian giants of Siberia and northern Asia did actually settle in North America and Pacific areas in America and South America. Therefore, the vast landmass which became known as Tartaria Magna, or Great Mighty Place, was the location where the descendants of the white giants established their civilization alongside the Phoenician Aryans and the Scythian Aryans. There are so many Native Americans who once fought against the ancestors of Tartarian giants. Over thousands of years, the stories which the American Indian tribes mesmerized about the white giants became an integral aspect of American Indian folklore. Some of the white giants also contributed to the development of Great Tartaria in the expanses of North America. Many of the white giants had a profound awareness of the geomagnetic structure around the planet Earth and constructed ornate-looking buildings where the ley lines converged across the North American continent. Most of the white giants who inhabited the North American continent had mostly disappeared from the United States by 1728, as they knew how to navigate through the passages which had been constructed beneath North America by the Lemurians and the Atlanteans. Once the first mud flood began and partially destroyed Great Tartaria on the 8th of January 1740, and the second mud flood did the same on the 29th of October 1834, many of the Tartarian giants had already escaped. Wherefore, after the third mud flood arose on the 7th of June 1892, the Tartarian giants had to establish another civilization by using the prehistoric subterranean passages to gain access into the concealed depths below the Appalachian Mountains and the Rocky Mountains. The communities of Tartarian giants also did the same in other remote areas of planet Earth. Although this seems a bit far out, when you do the research and look at the stories, you will then realize there are some very interesting dots to connect here. And that is why there is such a fascination with this subject. Both the white giants and their descendants, the Tartarian giants, seemingly regrouped inside the Hollow Earth. Did the white giants and the Tartarian giants build
Oh, here we go, the Hollow Earth theory.
the shimmering crystal cities, which are believed to have constructed within the Hollow Earth? The architecture of Great Tartaria had been extensively found in Russia, China, Taiwan and Japan, and in numerous other locations across the planet, and their buildings were constructed with geopolymer concrete, which became stronger over time, and the enormous iron and glass structures of Great Tartaria were surmounted with domes and metal needles that were used to continually absorb and transmit the atmospheric ether. Every power station of Great Tartaria, small and large, had brass pipe organs to harmonise and physically heal the Tartarian Aryans by the use of sound waves, which is now a scientific process called cymatics. The architecture of the chapels, churches and
Yep.
cathedrals on Earth share similar cymatic design patterns that were designed to focus and geometrically
We discussed about a lot about it on our own channel. Like, it's crazy. Like, a lot of information that's actually hidden from us.
shape the sound waves to maximize the vibration and tone, so the minds of the Tartarian Aryans could easily attune into the faster resonance of the Christ consciousness. Everyone who lived in Great Tartaria was fully aware of how the constant telluric currents of planet Earth were extracted and stored in the symmetrical toroid coils of the telluric generators and electrical capacitors in their own buildings. The single toroid coils were covered with copper and positioned below the metallic towers. Alongside this, each of the massive star fortresses was constructed by the Tartarian Aryans and used to energetically regulate the distribution of fresh water and electromagnetic currents around planet Earth. All over the planet, this incredible advanced technology was utilized for the extraction of the telluric currents by the absorption of the atmospheric ether, and even today the telluric currents still accumulate in some castles and palaces and many other buildings, as such remnant structures retain the same
You know, like, it's so crazy we have this kind of, like, structures built with such certain amount of geometric precision, and people still believe they build this using sticks and chisels and fucking donkeys, and they still believe that bullshit story narrative. Like, they build this using tools and chisels, like, and people, like, rolling rocks around. That's one of the most retarded fucking, like, takes ever. Like,
derelict generators and electrical capacitors, even though they were no longer accessible for public usage. The various kinds of Teralic generators and electrical capacitors were designed as elaborate roof grids, small window openings, the metallic ornaments in the corner of the buildings, pointed antennae, and with artistic ornaments or metallic spheres. Within different countries, invading armies that constantly fought against Great Tartaria then seized their palaces and quicksilver power stations and turned them into buildings of governance, colleges, museums, universities, banks, and even tourist attractions. How this actually happened, we can only speculate, but the evidence would most certainly point towards the buildings of Great Tartaria becoming repurposed after the mudfloods had occurred. Were some of the infants on the orphan trains from Great Tartaria? These infants had seemingly been accompanied to North America with their parents and were from the cultures of the Vitus Mundus, the Old World of mainland Europe. Once they arrived in the eastern United States, the infants and parents were sometimes separated, and the infants were placed in the Novus Mundus, the New World of the elites and their secret societies. Was this done so they could be reprogrammed by them? After the destruction of Great Tartaria, did some kind of cognitive dissonance occur and cause significant psychiatric issues for millions of adult Tartarian Aryans? We have to remember that even when the Orphan Train movement began, the third mudflood had not yet happened and would not occur until the 7th of June 1892, which means there would have been a successive levels of the migration into North America from the urban settlements of mainland Europe, which had been extensively damaged after the destruction of Great Tartaria had.
Yo, we need to do more research about this mudflood shit. Like, what was even the cause of this mudflood? Was it like a natural disaster or like an intentional human-made disaster?
Arisen once the first mudflood and the second mudflood had ended. The supervised welfare program that became known as the Orphan Train Movement was used to transport infants from the overcrowded urban areas of the eastern United States. Considerable overcrowding had occurred because successive levels of immigration had come into North America in a short time span, and there was not the resources to deal with the immigration problem in the eastern United States. Hence, the parentless infants of the orphan trains were taken to the foster homes across the rural areas in the Midwest United States. The various orphan trains operated between the 15th of January 1864 to the 20th of December 1889, although this did carry on for 40 years after in smaller numbers. During these dates, around 250,000 to 320,000 parentless infants were relocated, although many Americans believed it is more than 540,000 children were actually relocated during the Victorian period. The co-founders of the Orphan Train movement claimed that these infants were orphaned, abandoned, abused, or homeless, but this was not always true. Were they mostly the children of the immigrants and the poor, destitute families who had escaped the destruction which the first mudflood and the second mudflood had caused in mainland Europe? A number of charitable institutions were established during this time, and these were the Children's Village, formerly known as the New York's Juvenile Asylum. The original charter for the Children's Village was officially founded on the 30th of June 1851 by 24 philanthropists led by Robert Bound Minturn, who was collectively named in the Incorporation Act of 1851. The desperate and unhappy infants were moved from eastern United States on the locomotive transporters that were labelled the orphan trains or baby trains. This relocation of parentless infants ended on the 22nd of August 1930 due to the decreased need for farm labour in the rural areas of Indiana, Michigan, Ohio and Wisconsin. Lastly, the New York Foundling was founded
Yeah, it's just forced child labor.
on the 8th of October 1869 by Sister Mary Irene Fitzgibbon and the Roman Catholic Sisters of Charity. The New York Foundling then became one of the oldest and largest child welfare agencies of New York City. Once again, in the same time frame of the Victorian period, the bizarre incubator babies were exhibited at the World's Fair called the Exhibition of the Industry of All Nations at Bryant Park in New York City from July 1853 to November 1854. However, vast numbers of the incubator babies were also shown at other World's Fairs across mainland Europe and elsewhere on planet Earth. This
is just human trafficking with some extra steps. Human exhibitions. Bro, this is called human trafficking, that's what it is.
activity continued right up to when the World's Fair, known as the Fremantle Industrial Exhibition, was organised in the port of Fremantle next to the Swan River of Western Australia on the 4th of October 1894. When this Pacific World's Fair ended on the 26th of April 1895, the incubator babies were then concealed from the public. The individual known as Martin Arthur Cooney was an obstetrician in the United States of America who became known as the Incubator Doctor. He established an amusement park slideshow called the Infatorium, in which Europeans, Canadians and Americans paid 25 cents to view prematurely born minors displayed as the incubator babies. Whose children were the incubator babies? Where had they originated from? How was it possible for parentless infants to be exhibited as a sideshow at the World's Fair? Nothing that we have been given as the officially crafted narrative of history is correct. Most of the immigrants who left mainland Europe for safety reasons then settled in North America. However, the immigrants could not have constructed the massive buildings in locations such as Baltimore, in Maryland and Richmond, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, alongside the numerous other urban settlements of the eastern United States that are seen in so many photographs from the Victorian period. The reason for this is because most of the urban settlements did not have industrial railroad networks, and most individuals had to use the horse and the buggy to travel around. Therefore, the evidence suggests that it is very likely the Tartarian Aryans constructed the elaborate and ornate buildings that were found by the immigrants who arrived in North America. There is so much more to this world to discover, and we only touch the surface. Remain open to possibility in this world. Thank you for watching, everybody. Please subscribe if you haven't.
Yeah, and there's much more, like, if this is the information that's actually public about forced child labor and all this shit, like, how much fucked up shit actually happened, behind closed doors. Information that's actually not released to the public. So that's about it for the Orphan Train. And we'll be back with the next conspiracy.